Abandoned at a desolate gas station, a loyal dog sat trembling in confusion, watching cars speed by. But what happened after this heartbreaking moment sparked a chain of events no one could have foreseen and changed lives forever. The sun was setting behind a stretch of empty highway, casting long shadows over a remote gas station in the middle of nowhere. A modest convenience store stood next to the fuel pumps, its flickering neon sign barely holding on as the evening air grew colder. Among the shadows, a lone golden retriever sat near the station's edge, his golden fur matted with dirt and his eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't bark, didn't move much. He just sat there, waiting. This was Taylor, a once beloved family dog, now left behind by his owner. Earlier that afternoon, a black SUV had pulled into the gas station. A man, impatient and distracted, had stepped out, filled the tank, and gone inside to grab snacks. Taylor had excitedly jumped out of the car, eager to stretch his legs. But when the man returned, he either didn't notice or didn't care that Taylor wasn't back in the car. The SUV sped away, leaving Taylor confused and alone. The gas station attendant, Mark, noticed the dog sitting near the pump long after the SUV had gone. He walked out with a bag of chips in hand, his brows furrowed in concern. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, crouching down. Taylor perked up, his tail wagging faintly, but his gaze kept drifting back to the road, as if expecting his owner to return. Mark sighed, unsure of what to do. As darkness fell, Taylor remained at the gas station. Occasionally, he would dart toward passing cars, his ears perked up at the sound of an engine, only to retreat when the cars ignored him. The sight was enough to break anyone's heart, but for Mark it was especially difficult. He couldn't shake the thought of how loyal the dog seemed, waiting for someone who might never come back. Word began to spread among the few customers who passed through. Some left scraps of food for Taylor, while others shook their heads in disbelief at the cruelty of his situation. "People are so careless," one elderly woman muttered as she handed Mark a piece of bread for the dog. Unbeknownst to everyone, Taylor's abandonment was the beginning of an extraordinary journey. What started as a heart-wrenching scene of loss would soon lead to moments of incredible resilience, compassion, and an ending that no one could have predicted. Mark couldn't get Taylor out of his mind as the night wore on. The golden retriever lay curled up near the station's entrance, shivering slightly in the cold. Despite being a dog person himself, Mark knew he couldn't bring Taylor home. His landlord had a strict no-pets policy, but leaving the dog out there, waiting for an owner who might never return, felt equally wrong. At midnight, after his shift ended, Mark walked back outside with an old blanket he'd found in the storage closet. "Here you go, buddy," he murmured, draping the blanket over Taylor. The dog wagged his tail softly but didn't move from his spot. Mark crouched beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You deserve better than this." By morning, Taylor was still there, sitting vigilantly by the pump. Word of his abandonment continued to spread among the regulars at the gas station. A young couple stopped by to give him water, and a trucker left half a sandwich for him. Despite the kindness of strangers, Taylor's eyes remained fixated on the road, his faith in his owner's return unwavering. 3 days passed, and Mark began to notice a change in Taylor. His once hopeful gaze had dimmed, and his energy waned. The sight filled Mark with a sense of urgency. If no one came to claim the dog, something bad could happen to him. Determined to take action, Mark posted a picture of Taylor on social media with a brief caption, "Left behind at the gas station. This loyal pup has been waiting for days. Does anyone recognize him? He needs a home." The post quickly gained traction, with dozens of shares and comments pouring in. People offered suggestions, some expressing outrage at the situation, while others volunteered to adopt Taylor. Still, no one came forward claiming to be his owner. On the 5th day, a middle-aged woman named Lisa arrived at the gas station, having seen Mark's post. She introduced herself as a volunteer at a nearby animal rescue center. "We can take him in," she offered. "It's clear he needs medical attention and a safe place to stay." Mark hesitated. While he wanted Taylor to be cared for, he couldn't shake the feeling that the dog's story wasn't finished. "What if his owner comes back?" he asked. Lisa frowned. 5 days is a long time for a dog to wait. If someone cared about him, they'd have been here by now. Reluctantly, Mark agreed. Together, they coaxed Taylor into Lisa's car. The golden retriever seemed hesitant at first, Looking back at the gas station one last time before climbing in, Mark felt a pang of guilt as the car drove away, but he told himself it was for the best. At the rescue center, Taylor received a full medical checkup. The vet noted that while he was healthy overall, he showed signs of mild malnutrition and stress. The staff at the center worked hard to make him comfortable, but Taylor remained withdrawn. He ate sparingly and spent most of his time lying by the window, staring outside as if still waiting for someone. Meanwhile, Mark couldn't stop thinking about Taylor. Every time he saw the empty spot near the pump, he felt a gnawing sense of loss. He began checking Lisa's updates about Taylor daily, hoping for good news. 2 weeks after Taylor arrived at the shelter, a breakthrough occurred. Lisa called Mark with an excited tone in her voice. "You won't believe this, but Taylor saved another dog today." Mark was stunned. "What do you mean?" Lisa explained that a stray puppy had been brought into the center, terrified and trembling. The staff placed the puppy in the same room as Taylor, hoping the older dog's calm demeanor would help soothe the newcomer. To everyone's surprise, Taylor immediately took on a protective role, gently nudging the puppy toward the food bowl and lying beside him to keep him warm. The transformation in Taylor's behavior was astonishing. He seemed to come alive again. Lisa sent Mark a video of the interaction, which brought a smile to his face. "It's like he found a new purpose," Lisa said. "Maybe helping others is what Taylor needs." Inspired by this, Lisa and the rescue center team began introducing Taylor to more dogs in need. Over time, he became a sort of therapy dog for the shelter, helping nervous or traumatized animals adjust to their new surroundings. Taylor's story even drew local media attention, with a small news segment highlighting his role at the shelter. The headline read, "Abandoned Dog Becomes a Hero for Strays." Despite the newfound joy Taylor brought to others, Mark still felt a lingering sense of responsibility. He visited the rescue center one afternoon, wanting to see Taylor for himself. When the golden retriever spotted him, his tail wagged furiously, and he rushed to greet him. Mark knelt down, letting Taylor lick his face as a flood of emotions washed over him. "You remember me, huh?" Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. Taylor barked softly, as if to say, "How could I forget?" A week after Mark's visit to the shelter, Lisa received an unexpected call. A man claimed to be Taylor's original owner. He introduced himself as Jeremy and explained that he'd seen Taylor's story on the local news. "That's my dog," he said firmly. "His name's not Taylor, it's Buddy. I need to get him back." Lisa was immediately skeptical. "If this is your dog, why did you leave him at a gas station?" she asked. Jeremy hesitated, then launched into an explanation. He claimed that he and Buddy had been traveling cross-country when his car broke down at the gas station. With no money for repairs, he'd been forced to hitch a ride to the nearest town. "I planned to come back for him," Jeremy insisted. "But things got complicated, and it took longer than I expected." Lisa remained cautious. "Do you have any proof that he's your dog?" Jeremy quickly rattled off details about Buddy's appearance and habits, his favorite treat, a scar on his hind leg from an old injury, and how he loved to chase tennis balls. The descriptions matched Taylor perfectly. Lisa agreed to let him visit the shelter, but made it clear that she would prioritize Taylor's well-being above all else. When Jeremy arrived at the shelter the next day, his demeanor raised red flags. He was disheveled, with an impatient attitude and little interest in discussing Taylor's needs. The moment he saw the dog, he called out, "Buddy, it's me!" Taylor's reaction, however, was lukewarm at best. The golden retriever approached Jeremy cautiously, his tail wagging faintly, but without the enthusiasm he showed for Mark or Lisa. Lisa observed the interaction closely. "He doesn't seem too excited to see you," she noted. Jeremy shrugged. "He's probably just confused. It's been a while." Despite her reservations, Lisa allowed Jeremy to spend time with Taylor under supervision. During their interaction, Jeremy attempted to coax the dog with commands, but Taylor didn't respond. It became clear that, while Jeremy might have once owned Taylor, their bond had been severely weakened or broken entirely. Mark, who had been informed of the situation by Lisa, showed up at the shelter unexpectedly. "I had to see this for myself," he told her. When Taylor spotted Mark, his entire demeanor changed. The dog barked excitedly, tail wagging furiously as he ran toward him. Mark knelt down, and Taylor licked his face enthusiastically. Looks like he's made up his mind, Mark said, half joking. Jeremy frowned. He's my dog. I have the right to take him. Lisa stepped in, her tone firm. Jeremy, you left Taylor alone at a gas station for days. Whether intentional or not, that was neglect. And from what I'm seeing, Taylor is far happier and healthier here than he seems to be with you. Jeremy's frustration boiled over. You can't just keep him from me. I'm his owner. Mark, sensing the tension, spoke up. Maybe it's not about ownership. Maybe it's about what's best for Taylor. Lisa nodded. Exactly. Legally, we need to verify custody before making any decisions. Until then, Taylor stays here. Jeremy stormed out, muttering under his breath, but Lisa wasn't convinced the matter was over. We'll need to be careful, she warned Mark. He might come back. Later that evening, Mark couldn't shake the thought of Taylor potentially being taken away. Despite everything, he felt a deep connection to the dog, a bond forged through trust and care. Unable to sleep, he decided to take action. After Jeremy's departure, Lisa took extra precautions at the shelter. She updated the security system and asked her staff to keep a close eye on Taylor during his stay. If Jeremy comes back, I want to be ready, she told them. Meanwhile, Mark couldn't shake his worry about Taylor. He knew Jeremy had some claim to the dog, but his gut told him Taylor deserved better. Mark decided to visit the shelter again the next morning. When he arrived, he found Taylor in the play area, happily chasing a ball that one of the volunteers had thrown. He looks like he's settling in well, Mark said, approaching Lisa. Lisa nodded. He is, but that doesn't mean Jeremy won't try to reclaim him. I've started looking into legal advice to see what our options are. Mark frowned. Do you think he has a chance? Lisa hesitated. If he can prove ownership, legally speaking, he might, but the judge will also consider what's in the best interest of the dog. If Taylor's behavior with Jeremy yesterday was any indication, he's better off staying here or with you. The mention of Mark possibly adopting Taylor took him by surprise. He'd grown attached to the dog, but adopting him felt like a big step. Do you think I'd be a good fit for him? Mark asked. Lisa smiled. Taylor lights up every time he sees you. If you're willing to commit, I think you'd be a great match. Mark left the shelter deep in thought. Taylor had brought unexpected joy into his life, but adopting a dog wasn't a decision to take lightly. He spent the rest of the day researching what it would take to provide a good home for a dog like Taylor. By evening, he was leaning toward saying yes. The next day, Jeremy showed up at the shelter unannounced. This time, he brought a tattered folder containing photos of him and Taylor, then known as Buddy, along with veterinary records and adoption papers. This proves he's my dog, Jeremy declared, slapping the folder onto Lisa's desk. Lisa reviewed the documents carefully. While they did confirm that Jeremy had once owned Taylor, they didn't tell the whole story. This might show that you adopted him, she said, looking Jeremy in the eye. But it doesn't explain why you left him at a gas station. That's neglect, and it's not something we take lightly. Jeremy's frustration grew. I told you it wasn't intentional. I had no choice. Lisa wasn't convinced. If you really cared about Taylor, you would have come back for him immediately. As the argument continued, Mark entered the shelter. He stopped short when he saw Jeremy and Lisa in the middle of a heated exchange. What's going on? He asked. Jeremy turned to him, pointing angrily. Who are you to this dog? You're not his owner. Mark kept his composure. No, I'm not. But I've been spending time with him, and I care about his well-being. Lisa intervened. Mark's been helping us care for Taylor. Unlike you, he's been consistent. Jeremy's expression darkened. This isn't over. If I have to take this to court, I will. That evening, Mark and Lisa discussed the situation. Lisa explained that while Jeremy had presented proof of ownership, Taylor's behavior and well-being would play a critical role in any legal decision. The court might side with him, she admitted, but we can also present evidence showing that Taylor is better off without him. Mark thought for a moment before replying, What if I formally apply to adopt Taylor? Would that strengthen the case against Jeremy? Lisa considered this. It might. If the court sees that Taylor has a potential adopter who's willing to provide a stable and loving home, it could influence their decision. Mark nodded. Then I'll do it. Taylor deserves better than being dragged back into an unstable situation. Lisa handed him the adoption paperwork, and Mark filled it out on the spot. As he signed his name at the bottom, he felt a sense of determination. He wasn't just doing this for himself, he was doing it for Taylor. In the days that followed, the shelter prepared for the possibility of a legal battle. Lisa contacted an attorney who specialized in animal welfare cases, gathering evidence of Taylor's improved condition since arriving at the shelter. Mark provided a detailed account of his interactions with Taylor, emphasizing their growing bond. Meanwhile, Jeremy's behavior became increasingly erratic. He left angry voicemails at the shelter and even showed up late one night, banging on the doors and demanding to see Taylor. Lisa called the police, and Jeremy was escorted off the property. "This is harassment," Lisa told the officer. "We're taking this matter seriously." Despite the tension, Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the conflict surrounding him. He continued to thrive at the shelter, eagerly greeting Mark during his daily visits. Each time Mark saw him, his resolve to fight for Taylor grew stronger. 1 week later, Lisa received a notice from Jeremy's lawyer stating that he intended to pursue custody of Taylor. The court date was set, and the shelter braced itself for the upcoming battle. "It's going to be an uphill fight," Lisa told Mark, "but I think we have a strong case." Mark nodded. "Whatever it takes, I'm ready." As the court date loomed, Mark found himself reflecting on his growing attachment to Taylor. Each visit to the shelter strengthened their bond, and it became increasingly clear that Taylor saw him as more than just a visitor. He was a source of comfort and trust. But beneath this connection lay an undeniable tension: Jeremy's aggressive behavior and the uncertainty of the legal battle. One morning, Mark arrived at the shelter to take Taylor for a walk. As he entered the play yard, Taylor bounded toward him, tail wagging and eyes bright. "Hey, buddy," Mark said, kneeling to give the dog a scratch behind his ears. "Ready for a little adventure?" Lisa approached with a somber expression. "Mark, can we talk before you go?" He stood, sensing the gravity of her tone. "Of course. What's going on?" Lisa handed him a manila folder. "I had a private investigator look into Jeremy. I wanted to be prepared for court and, well, I think you need to see this." Mark opened the folder and skimmed through the documents inside. What he read made his stomach churn. Reports of previous complaints against Jeremy for neglecting animals, unpaid fines for leaving pets unattended, and even an eviction notice from a property where neighbors had reported hearing dogs barking in distress. "This is worse than I imagined," Mark said, his voice low. "How is someone like him even allowed to own animals?" Lisa sighed. "The system isn't perfect, but this gives us a stronger case. It shows a pattern of behavior that we can use to argue Taylor is better off elsewhere." Mark nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. "What's our next step?" Lisa explained that they would present the evidence in court alongside Taylor's improved condition at the shelter. "But we need to stay vigilant," she added. "Jeremy might not take this news well." That evening, Mark received an unexpected phone call from an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Mark, it's Jeremy," came the reply. His voice was calm, almost too calm, which immediately put Mark on edge. "I want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Mark said, keeping his tone firm. "Taylor's well-being is what matters, and I'm not backing down." Jeremy chuckled darkly. "You think you know what's best for my dog? You don't know the first thing about him." "I know enough to see he's happier and healthier without you," Mark shot back. The line went silent for a moment before Jeremy spoke again, his voice colder. "You're making a mistake, Mark. Taylor is mine, and I'll do whatever it takes to get him back." Before Mark could respond, Jeremy hung up. The conversation left Mark unsettled, but it also steeled his resolve. He couldn't let Taylor return to someone who had proven time and again that he couldn't provide a safe and loving home. The next day, Mark shared the phone call with Lisa, who immediately reported it to their attorney. "This shows Jeremy's state of mind," Lisa said. "It's important that we document everything." Mark agreed and began keeping a detailed record of his interactions with Jeremy, as well as his visits with Taylor. Meanwhile, the shelter continued to gather testimonials from volunteers and staff who had witnessed Taylor's transformation. One volunteer, a retired veterinarian named Dr. Carter, offered to testify. "I've seen too many cases like this," Dr. Carter said. "Taylor deserves better." As the days passed, Mark also faced challenges in his personal life. His boss, noticing his distracted demeanor at work, called him into his office. "Mark, is everything okay?" "You've been preoccupied lately." Mark hesitated before explaining the situation with Taylor. To his surprise, his boss was understanding. "I've got a dog too," he said. "I get it. Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your responsibilities here." Balancing his job and the legal battle was exhausting, but Mark was determined to see it through. He began spending his evenings preparing for court, going over every piece of evidence and practicing his testimony. Lisa and the attorney coached him on how to present his case, emphasizing the importance of staying composed under pressure. One night, as Mark reviewed his notes, he received a text message from an unknown number. "You're wasting your time. Taylor will be mine again soon." Mark felt a surge of anger, but forced himself to stay calm. He forwarded the message to Lisa and their attorney, who advised him not to respond. "Jeremy's trying to rattle you," the attorney said. "Don't let him." Despite the harassment, Mark refused to be intimidated. He knew he wasn't just fighting for Taylor, he was fighting for every animal who had ever been neglected or abandoned. The stakes were higher than he'd initially realized, and he wasn't about to back down. At the shelter, Taylor continued to thrive. He had become a favorite among the staff and volunteers, who often remarked on his gentle nature and eagerness to please. Mark visited every day, and their bond grew stronger with each interaction. One afternoon, as they played fetch in the yard, Mark looked into Taylor's eyes and saw a trust that hadn't been there before. It was a silent promise. No matter what happened, Mark would protect him. As the court date approached, Mark and Lisa received an unexpected piece of good news. A woman named Angela, who had previously lived in the same apartment complex as Jeremy, came forward with a statement. She described witnessing Jeremy's neglect firsthand and even provided photos of Taylor looking malnourished during that time. "This could be the tipping point," Lisa said, showing the photos to Mark. "It's hard evidence of what Taylor endured." Mark felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since the battle began, he felt like they might actually win. The courtroom was smaller than Mark had imagined, but its atmosphere felt heavy with tension. On one side sat Jeremy, his posture defiant and his face set in a scowl. On the other side, Mark sat with Lisa and their attorney, who quietly reviewed the stack of evidence they had prepared. Taylor wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but his presence was keenly felt. Everything hinged on this moment. As the proceedings began, Jeremy's lawyer painted a picture of a misunderstood dog owner who had fallen on hard times. "My client loves Taylor," the lawyer stated emphatically. "The alleged neglect was the result of financial struggles, not a lack of care or affection." Mark clenched his fists under the table, resisting the urge to interrupt. Lisa leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. We'll have our chance." When it was Mark's turn to testify, he walked to the stand, took an oath, and faced the judge. Their attorney guided him through a series of questions designed to highlight his interactions with Taylor and the evidence of Jeremy's neglect. "Mr. Anderson, can you describe Taylor's condition when you first encountered him at the gas station?" the attorney asked. Mark took a deep breath. He was emaciated, dehydrated, and visibly distressed. His ribs were showing, and he had sores on his paws from walking on hot pavement. It was clear he hadn't been cared for in a long time. The attorney handed a photograph to the judge and jury. It showed Taylor as Mark had found him, thin, scared, and exhausted. A murmur spread through the room as the image was passed around. Jeremy's lawyer attempted to discredit Mark's testimony, suggesting that he was exaggerating the severity of Taylor's condition. "You're not a veterinarian, are you, Mr. Anderson?" "No, but I've worked with animals for years as a volunteer at shelters," Mark replied evenly. "I know what a healthy dog looks like, and Taylor was far from healthy." The lawyer's cross-examination continued, but Mark held his ground. His calm demeanor and clear, detailed answers made an impression on the judge, who nodded thoughtfully as he spoke. Next, Lisa and the shelter staff testified. Dr. Carter, the retired veterinarian, provided expert analysis of Taylor's condition. "In my professional opinion, Taylor was neglected for an extended period," she said. "The evidence suggests he was not receiving adequate food, water, or medical care." Jeremy shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but maintained his defiant expression. When it was his turn to testify, he insisted that he loved Taylor and had simply made a mistake by leaving him at the gas station. "I was coming back for him," he claimed. "I just needed some time to get my life together." His words rang hollow, especially when the court presented the evidence of his past neglect. Angela, the former neighbor, took the stand and shared her first-hand account of seeing Taylor left outside in extreme weather, with little to no shelter. "It broke my heart to see him like that," she said, her voice trembling. "No dog deserves to be treated that way." Throughout the trial, Mark couldn't help but notice Jeremy's occasional glances in his direction. They weren't the hostile glares he'd expected, but something more unsettling. A mix of guilt and resentment. It was as if Jeremy recognized that Mark genuinely cared for Taylor, but couldn't bring himself to admit his own failings. The emotional weight of the trial took its toll on everyone involved. During a recess, Mark stepped outside to clear his head. He found himself staring at the courthouse steps, replaying the events of the past few weeks in his mind. Could he have done more to prevent this situation? Was he doing enough now? Lisa joined him, handing him a bottle of water. "You're doing great," she said, her tone reassuring. "Don't second-guess yourself." Mark nodded but remained silent. He knew the stakes were high, not just for Taylor, but for the broader message the case would send about animal welfare. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides delivered their closing arguments. Jeremy's lawyer pleaded for leniency, emphasizing his client's intentions to change. Mark's attorney, however, focused on Taylor's needs. "This is not about punishing Mr. Thompson," she said, gesturing toward Jeremy. "It's about ensuring Taylor has the safe, loving home he deserves." The judge adjourned the court to deliberate, leaving everyone in a state of nervous anticipation. Mark returned to the shelter that evening and spent time with Taylor, who greeted him with his usual enthusiasm. As he played with the dog in the yard, Mark felt a deep sense of responsibility. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "I'll always fight for you." The next morning, the judge delivered her ruling. The room was silent as she began, her tone measured and authoritative. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, it is clear that Taylor suffered from neglect while in Mr. Thompson's care. While the court acknowledges Mr. Thompson's claims of financial hardship, this does not excuse his failure to provide basic necessities for the dog's well-being. Mark held his breath, his heart pounding. Therefore, custody of Taylor is granted to Mr. Anderson, who has demonstrated a commitment to the dog's health and happiness. A wave of relief washed over Mark as the words sank in. Lisa squeezed his shoulder, and tears welled up in his eyes. Jeremy, on the other hand, stormed out of the courtroom without a word. As they left the courthouse, reporters and onlookers approached Mark for comments. He simply said, "Taylor deserves a life filled with love and care, and I'm honored to give that to him." At the shelter, Taylor seemed to sense the shift. When Mark arrived to take him home, the dog wagged his tail furiously and leapt into his arms. It was the start of a new chapter for both of them. The weeks following the court ruling brought newfound joy for Mark and Taylor. Yet beneath the surface of their happiness, a subtle tension began to build. Jeremy's departure from the courtroom hadn't felt like the end of the story. Mark couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the man wouldn't let go of Taylor so easily. Life with Taylor flourished. The dog had settled comfortably into Mark's home, his once guarded demeanor giving way to a playful and loving personality. Mark's neighbors often stopped to admire the golden retriever during their walks, commenting on how healthy and happy he looked now. One sunny afternoon, Mark and Taylor were playing fetch in the backyard when Lisa arrived unexpectedly. Her expression was serious, a stark contrast to her usual cheerful demeanor. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. "I just got off the phone with Dr. Carter. She's been receiving strange calls asking about Taylor. Someone's been inquiring about where he's staying." Mark frowned. "Did she say who it was?" "No, but she said the person didn't sound friendly. She thought it might be Jeremy." Mark's grip tightened on Taylor's leash. If he thinks he's going to take Taylor back, he's sorely mistaken. Later that evening, as Mark prepared dinner, he heard Taylor growl from the living room. The dog stood by the window, his fur bristling and his gaze fixed on something outside. Mark peered through the curtains but saw nothing unusual. Still, the unease lingered. He decided to install additional security cameras around the house. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered, patting Taylor's head. The next few days passed without incident, but the tension was palpable. Mark began to notice small, unsettling details: footprints in the dirt near his backyard gate, a car parked too long across the street, and Taylor's heightened alertness during their evening walks. One night, as Mark was drifting off to sleep, His phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. The motion detector had picked up activity in the backyard. Heart pounding, he opened the live feed to see a figure standing near the gate, attempting to unlatch it. "Not on my watch," Mark muttered, grabbing a flashlight and heading outside with Taylor at his side. He swung the beam of light toward the gate, catching a man mid-action. The figure froze, then bolted into the darkness. Mark's stomach churned as he recognized the retreating form. Jeremy. Taylor barked furiously, straining against the leash. "Easy, boy," Mark said, his voice firm but shaking slightly. He called the police, who arrived shortly after and took a report. While they couldn't apprehend Jeremy without proof of intent, they assured Mark that they would patrol the area more frequently. The next day, Lisa visited again, her concern evident. "Mark, I don't think Jeremy's just going to walk away. He's desperate, and desperate people do reckless things." Mark nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep Taylor safe. I won't let him go back to a life of neglect." Together, they brainstormed ways to strengthen Taylor's security. Lisa suggested a tracking collar, which would allow Mark to monitor Taylor's location at all times. They also arranged for a few trusted friends to help keep watch, ensuring that Taylor was never alone. Despite the precautions, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that Jeremy was planning something. His fears were confirmed one rainy evening when he returned home from a late meeting to find his back door ajar. Panic surged through him as he called out for Taylor. The dog's bark came from the living room, followed by the sound of a struggle. Rushing inside, Mark found Jeremy attempting to drag Taylor out the door. The dog fought back, growling and snapping, but Jeremy had a firm grip on his collar. "Let go of him!" Mark shouted, grabbing a broom and charging toward Jeremy. Startled, Jeremy released Taylor and stumbled backward. The dog wasted no time. He lunged at Jeremy, forcing him to the ground. Mark quickly pulled Taylor back, dialing the police as Jeremy scrambled to his feet and fled. The police arrived within minutes, taking statements and gathering evidence. They found a crowbar near the back door, indicating that Jeremy had forced his way in. "This is serious," one officer told Mark. "We'll issue a restraining order and increase patrols in the area." Mark nodded, his heart still racing. He looked down at Taylor, who had settled at his feet, his protective instincts still on high alert. "You saved the day, buddy," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. The incident galvanized Mark's determination to protect Taylor at all costs. He reinforced the security measures at home, including installing reinforced locks and adding floodlights to the backyard. Lisa organized a neighborhood watch, ensuring that everyone was on high alert for any suspicious activity. Meanwhile, Mark filed additional charges against Jeremy for attempted theft and breaking and entering. The case gained attention in the local media, shining a spotlight on animal neglect and the lengths people would go to protect their pets. As the days passed, the community rallied around Mark and Taylor. Neighbors brought over supplies, offered words of encouragement, and shared stories of their own beloved pets. The local shelter even organized a fundraiser to support animal welfare, using Taylor's story as inspiration. For the first time since the ordeal began, Mark felt a glimmer of hope. Taylor, too, seemed to sense the shift. His tail wagged more often, and his playful energy returned. Together, they had faced a harrowing challenge and emerged stronger. The days following the attempted break-in brought a surprising wave of support from Mark's community. Taylor became a symbol of resilience, his story shared in local newsletters and social media groups. The increased attention brought unexpected connections, including a visit from Sarah, a volunteer at a nearby animal shelter. "I read about what happened," Sarah said, when she stopped by with a bag of dog treats and toys. "Taylor is incredible, and what you've done for him is inspiring. We'd love for you to share his story at our next shelter event." Mark hesitated, unsure if he wanted to relive the harrowing experience in front of an audience. But Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious, and he eventually agreed, realizing it could be an opportunity to advocate for better animal welfare. Meanwhile, Jeremy's actions continued to cast a shadow. The restraining order and pending legal charges seemed to deter him temporarily, but Mark couldn't forget the look of desperation on his face during the break-in. It was clear that Jeremy's attachment to Taylor wasn't just about the dog. It symbolized something deeper, perhaps regret or guilt over his past neglect. Lisa, ever the pragmatist, encouraged Mark to focus on building a positive future for Taylor, rather than dwelling on Jeremy's potential next move. "You've already won, Mark," she said one afternoon over coffee. "Taylor is safe, loved, and thriving. Don't let Jeremy's mistakes overshadow that." Mark nodded, appreciating her perspective, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the story wasn't over. The shelter event proved to be a turning point. Held in a local park, it featured booths from rescue organizations, adoption drives, and educational sessions about responsible pet ownership. Mark and Taylor were invited to speak during the main program, their story framed as a testament to the transformative power of love and care. As Mark recounted Taylor's journey, from abandonment at a gas station to becoming a beloved companion, the crowd listened intently. Taylor sat at his feet, his golden fur gleaming in the sunlight, occasionally wagging his tail as if acknowledging the applause. "Taylor taught me something important," Mark concluded, his voice steady. "He showed me how resilience and trust can grow, even in the face of neglect. Every animal deserves a second chance, just like he had." The crowd erupted in applause, and Sarah approached the stage to thank Mark for his words. "You've inspired more people than you know," she said, handing him a framed certificate of appreciation. After the event, Mark noticed a familiar face lingering at the edge of the crowd: Jeremy. He was unkempt and avoided direct eye contact, but seemed intent on staying close. Taylor, surprisingly, didn't growl or bark. Instead, he looked at Jeremy with a calm curiosity, his tail wagging slightly. Mark approached cautiously. "Jeremy, what are you doing here?" Jeremy shifted uncomfortably. "I heard about the event. I just wanted to see Taylor." Mark's first instinct was to send him away, but something in Jeremy's tone gave him pause. "He's doing well, as you can see," Mark said, keeping his voice neutral. Jeremy nodded, his eyes fixed on Taylor. "I'm glad. I know I don't deserve him back. I was a terrible owner, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." The unexpected apology left Mark speechless for a moment. He had expected defiance or excuses, not remorse. "It's not about me, Jeremy," he finally said. "It's about Taylor. He deserves the best life, and that's what I'm trying to give him." Jeremy nodded again, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand. Thank you for taking care of him." Mark watched as Jeremy turned to leave, a strange mix of relief and pity washing over him. For all his faults, Jeremy seemed like a man burdened by his past mistakes. Still, Mark knew that Taylor's safety came first, and he wasn't willing to take any chances. The encounter with Jeremy became a catalyst for deeper reflection. Mark realized that his own journey with Taylor had not only transformed the dog's life but also reshaped his own. He had gone from being a solitary, cautious individual to someone who valued connection and community. Lisa noticed the change too. "You're different, Mark," she said one evening as they walked Taylor together. "You're more open, more willing to trust." "Taylor taught me that," Mark admitted with a smile. "He took a chance on me, so I figured I owed it to him to do the same." As the weeks turned into months, Taylor's story continued to inspire. The shelter event led to invitations for Mark to speak at schools and community centers, where he shared lessons about compassion, responsibility, and the profound bond between humans and animals. Jeremy, meanwhile, kept his distance. There were no further incidents. Though Mark occasionally caught glimpses of him in the neighborhood, it seemed the man had resigned himself to being an observer in Taylor's life. One chilly autumn morning, Mark received a letter in his mailbox. It was from Jeremy. The letter was heartfelt and raw, detailing his struggles with addiction and how Taylor had been his only source of comfort during his darkest days. "I thought I was protecting him by leaving him behind," Jeremy wrote, "but now I see I was just running away from my responsibilities. Thank you for giving him the life I couldn't." Mark folded the letter and stared at it for a long time. It didn't absolve Jeremy of his past actions, but it added a layer of humanity to the story, a reminder that people, like animals, could grow and change under the right circumstances. The bond between Mark and Taylor only deepened as time went on. Together, they became advocates for animal welfare, their story a beacon of hope for others facing similar challenges. Taylor had gone from being abandoned at a gas station to becoming a beloved symbol of resilience. And Mark had transformed you too. No longer a man weighed down by caution, but someone who embraced the unexpected joys that came with opening his heart. It had been several months since the shelter event, and Jeremy's emotional letter Mark and Taylor had settled into a routine that felt peaceful yet purposeful. Taylor continued to thrive, his coat shining and his demeanor confident. He had become a local hero of sorts, recognized by neighbors and even strangers during their walks. However, one late afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, a sudden disturbance broke the calm. Mark was in the backyard with Taylor, throwing a frisbee, when he noticed a figure at the far edge of his property. It was Jeremy. Mark's heart sank as the man hesitated by the fence, his posture tense and uncertain. Before Mark could say anything, Taylor perked up, his ears alert. He ran toward the fence, barking, though his tail wagged cautiously. Mark called him back, unsure of Jeremy's intentions. "What are you doing here, Jeremy?" Mark asked, keeping his voice calm but firm. Jeremy raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just needed to see him. One last time." Mark hesitated. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but he also didn't trust Jeremy fully. "You wrote to me. You said you understood. Taylor is safe here, Jeremy. Let him be." "I know," Jeremy said, his voice trembling. I've been trying to get my life together. I'm in a program now. I've been sober for 90 days, and seeing Taylor was the only thing that kept me going." Taylor stood at Mark's side now, watching Jeremy intently. His usual distrust of the man seemed to have faded into something softer, as if he sensed the sincerity in Jeremy's words. Mark sighed, unsure how to respond. "Look, Jeremy, I'm glad you're trying to make changes, but Taylor is my responsibility now. He's happy here. I'm not asking for him back," Jeremy said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that, but I wanted to apologize to him for abandoning him." Mark frowned, surprised by the request. "You think he'll understand an apology?" Jeremy nodded. "Dogs forgive more than people do. I just need to say it." Mark debated internally. Taylor seemed calm, and Jeremy's presence, while unplanned, didn't feel threatening. After a moment, he opened the gate slightly, keeping a firm grip on Taylor's leash. Jeremy stepped through, his movements cautious, as if afraid of spooking the dog. "Hey, Taylor," Jeremy said softly, kneeling a few feet away. His voice cracked with emotion. "I'm sorry, buddy. I should have never left you like that. You deserved better than me." Taylor tilted his head, his eyes studying Jeremy intently. Then, to Mark's amazement, Taylor stepped forward, nudging Jeremy's hand with his nose. It was a gesture of acceptance, simple yet profound. Tears streamed down Jeremy's face as he gently stroked Taylor's fur. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The moment was brief but powerful. Mark watched, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, sympathy, and an unshakable protectiveness over Taylor. After a few minutes, Jeremy stood, wiping his face. "I'll go now," he said, his voice steadier. "Thank you, Mark, for everything." Mark nodded, leading Taylor back inside as Jeremy left. The interaction lingered in Mark's mind long after the sun had set, leaving him with more questions than answers. The following week, Mark received an unexpected call from Sarah, the shelter volunteer. "Mark, you need to see this," she said urgently, sending him a link to a local news article. The headline read, "Former dog owner turns advocate for rescue animals." The article detailed Jeremy's efforts to volunteer at a nearby shelter, using his story of losing Taylor as a cautionary tale about neglect and second chances. It included a photo of Jeremy holding a rescue dog, his expression determined yet humble. Mark felt a surge of pride, mingled with disbelief. He hadn't expected Jeremy to turn his life around so drastically, but it seemed Taylor's impact had extended far beyond their little home. That night, as Mark sat on the couch with Taylor curled up beside him, he reflected on the twists and turns their journey had taken. What had begun as an act of rescue had grown into something much larger, a testament to the ripple effects of kindness and the capacity for change. The next morning, Mark received another surprise. A letter arrived in the mail, this time from the shelter. Inside was an invitation to speak at a national animal welfare conference, with Taylor as the featured guest. The conference organizers had been inspired by their story and wanted them to share it with a broader audience. Mark smiled as he read the letter, scratching Taylor behind the ears. "Well, buddy," he said, "looks like we've got more work to do." Taylor wagged his tail, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and trust. Together, they had already changed so much, and their journey was far from over. Mark sat in his home office, the invitation to the National Animal Welfare Conference open on his desk. It felt surreal, being asked to share their story with an audience of advocates and experts. Taylor, ever his loyal companion, sat at Mark's feet, occasionally nudging his leg for attention. "I guess we're making waves, huh, buddy?" Mark said, reaching down to scratch Taylor behind the ears. The dog wagged his tail in response, a warm reminder of the bond they had built. Yet amidst the excitement, Mark felt a tug of apprehension. Sharing their story meant revisiting painful moments, not just for himself, but for Taylor, too. Mark's phone buzzed. It was Sarah, the shelter volunteer who had played a crucial role in their journey. "Hey, Mark," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "Have you decided yet? The conference is just a month away?" "I'm still thinking about it," Mark admitted. "It's a big stage, and I'm not sure if we're ready for something like that." Sarah's tone softened. "Mark, you and Taylor have already inspired so many people. This is a chance to amplify that impact. Think about all the animals and owners who could benefit from hearing your story." Mark sighed, glancing at Taylor, who had sprawled out on the rug, looking utterly content. "I'll give it some thought," he promised, ending the call. Over the next few days, Mark wrestled with his decision. On one hand, he wanted to honor Taylor's journey and the changes it had sparked, not just in their lives, but in Jeremy's and countless others. On the other hand, he worried about exposing their private struggles to public scrutiny. The internal debate reached a tipping point during one of their walks. Taylor had become somewhat of a local celebrity, and it wasn't unusual for people to stop and ask about him. But that day, a young boy approached with his mother. The boy was holding a leash attached to a shy, nervous-looking puppy. "Is this Taylor?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with admiration. Mark smiled. "It sure is." "And who's this little one?" The boy crouched down, gently petting Taylor. "This is Buddy. We just adopted him from the shelter. My mom said we could because we read about Taylor in the paper." Mark's heart swelled. He knelt to shake the boy's hand. "That's wonderful. I'm sure Buddy's going to have an amazing life with you." The boy beamed, and as they walked away, Mark realized the magnitude of Taylor's influence. Their story wasn't just theirs anymore, it was a beacon of hope for others. That evening, Mark sat down with his laptop and typed out his acceptance email to the conference organizers. He hit send, feeling a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. "Well, Taylor," he said, looking at the dog curled up beside him, "we're doing this." As the conference date approached, Mark worked tirelessly on their presentation. He pored over photos and videos of Taylor's journey, from the first day at the gas station to their many milestones. He also reached out to Jeremy, who had continued his volunteer work and was now fostering his first rescue dog. Jeremy was ecstatic to hear about the conference. "You're going to be amazing, Mark. And Taylor, he's going to steal the show." Mark chuckled. "I just hope he doesn't get stage fright." On the day of the conference, the venue buzzed with energy. Advocates, veterinarians, and animal lovers filled the auditorium, eager to hear stories of resilience and transformation. As Mark waited backstage, he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Deep breaths," Sarah said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You and Taylor have got this." Mark nodded, glancing at Taylor, who seemed unfazed by the bustling environment. His calm demeanor was a source of comfort, a silent reminder of why they were there. When their turn came, Mark walked onto the stage with Taylor at his side. The audience erupted into applause, and Taylor, ever the showman, wagged his tail and even barked once, drawing laughter and cheers. Mark began his speech, recounting their journey with raw honesty. He spoke about the day he found Taylor, the challenges they faced, and the people who had helped along the way. As he described Taylor's transformation from a scared, abandoned dog to a confident and beloved companion, he could see tears in the eyes of some audience members. "Taylor taught me that second chances are powerful," Mark said, his voice steady. "Not just for animals, but for people, too. He's shown me that resilience and love can overcome even the darkest circumstances." The presentation ended with a standing ovation. Mark glanced down at Taylor, who seemed to sense the significance of the moment. As they exited the stage, several attendees approached to share their own stories of rescue and redemption, each one reinforcing the importance of their message. That evening, as Mark and Taylor returned home, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. The conference had been a success, But more importantly, it had solidified their purpose. They weren't just sharing a story, they were creating a legacy. "Taylor," Mark said, his voice filled with gratitude, "you've changed my life, and I think you're just getting started." Taylor wagged his tail, his eyes gleaming with trust and contentment. Together, they had found a way to turn a moment of despair into a lifetime of hope. The morning after the conference, Mark woke up to the soft nudging of Taylor's nose against his hand. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the room. It felt like the beginning of something new. As Mark stretched, he noticed a stack of emails on his phone, responses from attendees at the conference, all expressing gratitude for sharing their story. One email, however, caught his eye. It was from a national animal welfare organization, inviting Mark and Taylor to collaborate on a campaign promoting rescue adoptions. They wanted to feature Taylor as a symbol of resilience and second chances. Later that day, as Mark sat on the porch with Taylor, he contemplated the email. The idea of reaching a larger audience was thrilling, but it also came with challenges. Accepting would mean traveling and committing to a public life, something Mark had never envisioned for himself or Taylor. Yet, the thought of helping more animals find loving homes outweighed his hesitations. The decision solidified when Jeremy called. "Mark, I just wanted to thank you again. After seeing you and Taylor at the conference, I've decided to adopt the dog I was fostering. I can't imagine my life without him." Mark's heart swelled. "That's amazing, Jeremy. I'm proud of you." "Taylor inspired me," Jeremy admitted. "I realized that giving up on him would have been like giving up on myself." As Mark hung up the phone, he looked at Taylor, who lay stretched out on the porch. "What do you think, boy? Should we give this a shot?" Taylor thumped his tail against the wooden floor as if to say yes. Mark emailed the organization and began planning their next steps. Over the following weeks, their story gained traction across social media and local news outlets. People from all walks of life reached out to share how Taylor's journey had touched them. Some spoke of rescues they'd adopted. Others admitted it had inspired them to take action. Taylor became a symbol of hope, and Mark found himself thrust into a world of advocacy he hadn't anticipated. Their days became a flurry of interviews, photo shoots, and community events. Taylor adjusted seamlessly, his calm demeanor a grounding force for Mark. The turning point came during a visit to an overburdened shelter in a nearby town. As Mark toured the facility, he was struck by the sheer number of animals in need. The shelter director, a woman named Karen, explained the struggles they faced: limited funding, overcrowding, and a lack of adoptions. Mark couldn't shake the image of the dogs staring out from behind the bars, their eyes filled with longing. That evening, he sat down with Karen to discuss how he and Taylor could help. They brainstormed a campaign that would not only raise funds, but also encourage people to foster and adopt. The campaign launched a month later, with Taylor as its centerpiece. Billboards and online ads featured his story, urging people to be the second chance. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, the shelter saw a spike in adoptions, and donations poured in from across the country. Karen called Mark in tears one afternoon to share the news. "You and Taylor have saved so many lives," she said. "I can't thank you enough." Mark's life transformed in ways he never imagined. He found himself on stages and in meetings, advocating for policies that would protect animals and support shelters. Taylor was by his side every step of the way, his quiet strength a constant reminder of why they were doing this. Their efforts culminated in the creation of a foundation dedicated to supporting rescue shelters and promoting responsible pet ownership. Mark named it Taylor's Legacy, a tribute to the dog who had changed his life and countless others. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Mark reflected on how far they had come. He glanced at the framed photo on the mantel, the first picture he'd taken of Taylor. Dirty and scared at the gas station, it was a stark contrast to the vibrant, healthy dog now curled up at his feet. "You've come a long way, buddy," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "And so have I." Taylor lifted his head, his soulful eyes meeting Mark's. It was as if he understood every word. Their journey was far from over, but Mark knew they were on the right path. Together, they had turned a moment of abandonment into a movement of hope. And as the fire crackled and the night deepened, Mark felt a profound sense of peace. Taylor wasn't just a dog, he was a testament to the transformative power of love and resilience. As the days passed, Taylor's recovery at the shelter continued, but his emotional wounds remained evident. While he bonded deeply with Mark, the dog's hesitancy around strangers spoke volumes about the trauma he had endured. One fateful afternoon, as Mark returned from a supply run, the shelter erupted in chaos. Karen ran toward him, her face pale with worry. "Mark, Taylor is missing," she exclaimed, struggling to catch her breath. He bolted through the back gate when a truck startled him. Panic surged through Mark as he grabbed his keys. "Which direction did he go?" Karen pointed toward the open fields bordering the highway. Without a second thought, Mark sprinted to his truck, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The countryside stretched endlessly as Mark drove, his eyes scanning every corner of the landscape. He called out Taylor's name repeatedly, his voice breaking with desperation. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the fields in hues of gold and crimson. Exhaustion gnawed at Mark, but giving up wasn't an option. As he reached a narrow dirt road, something caught his eye, a flicker of movement near an abandoned barn. He slammed the brakes and jumped out of the truck, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside the barn, the dim light revealed Taylor huddled in a corner, trembling. His eyes widened with recognition as Mark approached, but the dog didn't move. Mark noticed a deep gash on Taylor's paw, likely from a sharp piece of metal during his escape. "Taylor," Mark whispered, kneeling a few feet away. "It's okay, buddy. I'm here." Taylor whimpered softly, torn between his instinct to flee and his trust in Mark. Slowly, Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of jerky, holding it out as a peace offering. "It's just you and me, Taylor. Come on, boy. Let's go home." After what felt like an eternity, Taylor took a hesitant step forward. Mark stayed perfectly still, allowing the dog to close the distance. Finally, Taylor buried his head in Mark's chest, letting out a long, quivering sigh. Tears filled Mark's eyes as he wrapped his arms around Taylor. "You scared me half to death," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's get you out of here." Mark carefully lifted Taylor into the truck and drove back to the shelter, his heart pounding with relief. When they arrived, the staff greeted them with cheers. But Mark's focus was solely on Taylor. He carried the dog into the medical wing, where Karen and a veterinarian immediately tended to his injuries. "Physically, he'll be fine," the vet assured Mark. "But it's clear he still carries a lot of emotional scars." Mark nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes to help him heal." That night, as Mark sat by Taylor's side, he thought about how far they had come. He realized that their bond wasn't just about companionship, it was about redemption for both of them. Taylor had given Mark a purpose, and Mark had shown Taylor that love could replace fear, but their story wasn't over yet. The next morning, as Mark walked into the shelter's main office, he found Karen holding a stack of adoption applications. "These are for Taylor," she said, handing him the papers. "He's become a bit of a local celebrity since his story went public." Mark's stomach twisted. The thought of Taylor leaving him felt unbearable, but he also knew the goal of the shelter was to find permanent homes for every animal. "You should look through them," Karen said gently. "It's your decision." That evening, Mark sat in his small apartment with the applications spread out before him. Each one painted a picture of a loving home, but none of them felt right. As he read through the final application, Taylor nudged his leg with his nose, as if sensing his turmoil. Mark set the papers aside and looked into Taylor's eyes. "What do you think, buddy? Do you want to stay with me?" Taylor wagged his tail and rested his head on Mark's lap, his answer unmistakable. In that moment, Mark made his decision. The next day, Mark returned to the shelter with the applications. Karen raised an eyebrow as he handed them back, unsigned. "I can't let him go," Mark said firmly. "Taylor isn't just a dog to me, he's family." Karen smiled, her eyes shining with understanding. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Congratulations, Mark. Taylor is officially yours." The adoption papers were signed that afternoon, sealing their bond forever. As Mark clipped Taylor's new collar into place, he whispered, "Welcome home, buddy." For the first time, Taylor barked, a joyous, resounding bark that echoed through the shelter, drawing smiles from everyone around them. It was as if Taylor knew he had finally found his forever home. With Taylor by his side, Mark threw himself into his work at the shelter. Together, they became advocates for rescue animals, traveling to schools and community events to share their story. Taylor's transformation from an abandoned dog to a symbol of hope inspired countless adoptions and donations, ensuring that no animal would be left behind. Their journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. Mark and Taylor had saved each other, and together they would continue to change lives. Now cheered and loved, Taylor had become more than just a dog. He was a living testament to the power of kindness, perseverance, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. As the months rolled on, life with Taylor became a new normal for Mark. The once timid dog, who had been abandoned at a gas station, blossomed into a vibrant and affectionate companion. His golden coat gleamed in the sunlight as he ran through the park, his tail wagging like a banner of triumph. Mark's small apartment, once quiet and lonely, now felt alive with Taylor's presence. Every morning began with Taylor nudging Mark awake, eager for their daily adventures, and every evening ended with the two of them curled up on the couch, Taylor's head resting on Mark's lap as they watched old movies together. Word of Taylor's incredible journey spread far and wide, sparking interest from local news outlets and animal welfare organizations. Mark was invited to share their story at events, where Taylor often stole the spotlight with his calm demeanor and wagging tail. One day, during a community fundraiser for the shelter, a little girl approached Taylor with wide eyes. "Is he the dog from the story?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark smiled and nodded. "That's right. This is Taylor." The girl crouched down, wrapping her arms around Taylor's neck. "He's so brave," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "Just like you." Taylor's story inspired a wave of adoptions at the shelter. Families who had once hesitated to adopt now saw the potential in every animal. The shelter's kennels began to empty, and donations poured in, enabling them to expand their services and rescue more animals in need. Karen, who had always believed in Taylor's resilience, watched with pride as the shelter became a hub of hope and transformation. "It's amazing how one dog can make such a difference," she said to Mark one afternoon as they loaded supplies for a new rescue mission. Mark nodded, his eyes following Taylor as he played with a group of children nearby. "He changed my life," he admitted, "and he's changing the lives of so many others." Despite the overwhelming positivity, Mark couldn't forget the pain Taylor had endured. One rainy evening, as Taylor curled up beside him, Mark found himself thinking about the family who had left Taylor behind. He wondered if they ever regretted their actions, or if they even realized the incredible dog they had abandoned. Mark decided to channel that lingering sadness into something meaningful. He began working on a project called Second Chances, an initiative aimed at educating people about responsible pet ownership and the importance of second chances for both animals and humans. The program quickly gained traction, with schools, community centers, and even local businesses hosting events. Taylor became the face of the initiative, his story serving as a powerful reminder that every life deserves love and care. At one such event, a man approached Mark with tears in his eyes. "Your story. It reminded me of a mistake I made years ago," he confessed. "I let go of a dog I couldn't care for, and I've regretted it ever since. Seeing Taylor gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, my dog found someone as kind as you." Mark placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can make things better for the future." Taylor's fame continued to grow, but to Mark he was just his dog, his loyal, goofy, and loving partner in life. Their bond was unshakable, built on trust, forgiveness, and the simple joy of being together. One sunny afternoon, as they sat by the lake watching the ducks paddle by, Mark turned to Taylor with a smile. "You know, buddy, you didn't just get a second chance. You gave me one, too." Taylor looked up at Mark, his tail wagging as if to say, "I know." In the end, Taylor's story wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. From an abandoned dog at a gas station to a symbol of hope, Taylor embodied the resilience of the spirit and the power of unconditional love. As Mark looked out over the water with Taylor by his side, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. For every tear shed, every sleepless night, and every ounce of doubt, there was now an overwhelming sense of purpose and joy. Taylor and Mark's story is a testament to the incredible bond between humans and animals. If this story moved you, Consider opening your heart to a rescue animal in need. Together, we can create more happy endings like Taylor's. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories. Let's spread the message of love, hope, and second chances, because every life deserves a chance to shine.